At least I'm here.
Let's give it a couple more minutes here, see who shows up. 18. I've got 18. Oh, there they are. Hi, everybody. Are you flipping me off, Carol? Sorry, I can't hear you.
I said I was turning on my volume.
Oh, all right, I can hear you now.
I have a request. I have
Got
a
it.
who just ended up with a fire, and she needs to move out of her house for like 6 months while they remodel. So if anyone hears of anything, a 6-month rental in the South Bay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be back.
I'm looking for Amanda. Is she one of our, she hasn't signed on yet, huh?
I'll be back.
Okay, please unmute yourself and yell or wave your hand, or you can use the chat at the bottom of your screen as you go through this. Because this afternoon, we're going to talk about the coronavirus and the COVID-19 forms that we want everyone to use. Any questions up front? Okay, so as we discussed a few weeks ago, at the end of July, the latest forms came out. They updated a few previous forms. And so the way I've got this divided up is I'm going to work with the forms that are required for a buyer and the forms that are required for a seller. So we're going to try to keep this simple. I think I can get through most of this in about 30 minutes. And I hope that you have some questions. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in here. First off, when you have a buyer, the first thing that you need to do is have that buyer sign that PEAD-V. So the PEAD, that stands for the Property Entry Advisory and Declaration. PEAD, Property Entry Advisory and Declarations. And the V stands for visitor. So the difference is that there's one that the seller will talk about later, and that's the PEAD-S, and it's a completely different form. But the one for the visitor, if you go through this, it states the rules for the buyer upon entering a property. And I'm going to go through some of the, I'm just going to highlight the major points in this. This is a two-page form. So the rules basically is that the buyer is to wash their hands immediately upon entering the property. They're to wear a mask. The visitor is responsible to protect themselves, to practice social distancing, and they're instructed not to touch anything. So, and then they itemize this. They say this means, we don't want you touching light switches, door handles, remotes, any gate latches, toilet handles, any counters, etc. So don't touch anything, walk through the property and check it out. Also on this form, the buyer acknowledges that there will be no flyers or marketing materials. So this is important because we're going to talk about this on the seller side. That means as a listing agent, you're not supposed to have any of this material at the house. No flyers. A set of rules will be posted at the entrance. That's that PRE form. And that the buyers have agreed to the BPPP. That's the BPPP, what does that stand for? That's the Best Practices Prevention Plan, BPPP. So that's a form that goes out to the buyers and the sellers. And it states all the rules in showing properties during this COVID-19 period that we're in. That form, it's a 2-page best practices prevention plan that's attached to that PEAD-visitor. Okay, so the buyer is going to sign this PEAD-V. They're going to agree to these terms. Again, the terms are in the BPPP. It also states in there that you currently are not sick, that you may catch COVID-19, that you will notify your agent if you have any change in your health. Also, it states that if any minors are accompanying you, that you are responsible for them and that you are going to list their names in that PEAD-V. So all of this comes with the buyer when you're showing property, this PEAD-V for visitor. Lastly, it states that you understand these 4 papers and that you voluntarily agree to them by signing below, as it states there. In the BPPP, it states, and again, this is a 2-page form that goes to buyers and sellers. That best practices form states that there will be no open houses, that there will only be one agent and buyer viewing the property at a time. Now they identify it as one buying party at a time. So the buying party may be the husband and wife and a kid. It could be 3 or 4 people, but that's identified as one buying party. They are the only ones that should be in the house at a time. In other words, you can't have 3 or 4 sets of buyers wandering through. The resident or the owner should not be present. Now again, this is should not. So, all of these rules are guidelines as to how we should be working during this COVID-19. So, for example, I've got a listing coming up. I'm just going to advise my seller. I go, hey, when we make appointments, please go outside onto the patio. The agent will show the property and let you know when they're leaving. And that's good practice even without the COVID-19. I mean, the buyers really don't want to see the sellers, and the sellers should not be talking directly to the buyers. But in this best practices form, it specifically states that the residents or the seller should not be present at the showings. Everybody should be practicing social distancing, and that masks are required, and all material. This means the flyers, any advertisements should all be done electronically. So don't have any handouts there at the property, and don't have your buyer expect to get any handouts. Also in this BPPP, this best practices guidelines, it states under cleaning that the showing agent shall clean, disinfect, and provide cleaning supplies unless otherwise agreed. That unless otherwise agreed is in there because in the actual listing forms now, there's places where the seller can take responsibility for providing that, the listing agent can take responsibility, or other parties. You can hire a third party to provide those forms. Under this cleaning, the selling agent, in addition to cleaning, disinfecting, and providing cleaning supplies, should not sweep the floors. This is in the form, since that can disperse the pathogens into the air. And when you're vacuuming agents, use a vacuum with a HEPA filter. And this is after every showing. Agents should have proper sanitation products. This includes a mask, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes for visitors, and showings should not take place without these sanitation products. No showings may occur unless the commonly used surfaces have been cleaned and disinfected. And they define these commonly used surfaces as counters, door and cabinet knobs, lock boxes, keypads, toilets, sinks, light switches, handrails, etc. Yeah, it goes on here. So as it states in here, these surfaces need to be cleaned and disinfected before and after each showing. Before and after. And if the occupants are present, they must adhere to the same standards. Okay, so nothing to it, right? That's the those are the requirements when you're working with a buyer. Just as a review, you're using that PEADV and also the best practices form. They're each 2 pages. When you print out that PEADV, the best practice 2-page form comes with it. So
Hey, Derf,
you send
this
that
is
to your
Dan.
buyer and have them sign it and get
Hey,
it back.
Derf, can you hear me?
Question. Yes, I can, Dan. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So my question is, it's clear if you're the showing agent. So hopefully those things you just mentioned, the disinfectant, I'm sorry, to have the hand sanitizers and such there, that'll help a lot. If no one touches anything, what does the showing agent have to, then if everyone follows the rules and no one touches anything, follows the rules, what does the showing agent have to do to clean after everyone finishes after you leave?
Okay, well, as stated in that best practices, it's the listing agent's responsibility to see that the property is clean before and after every showing.
Oh, the listing, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
It's their responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Did Amanda show up? Is she on there? Okay. All right, so if no other questions about the buyer, we're going to go to the seller forms. Everybody with me? Okay. Seller has a little more paperwork involved. Basically, when you print out the listing paperwork, also print out the listing agreement coronavirus addendum. That's the RLA-CAA for the seller to sign. This coronavirus addendum for sellers, it has 3 parts. There's a 2-page addendum. There's the 1-page PEAD-S for seller. And there, for number 3, there's the 2-page BPPP that we just reviewed. So the best practices form is the same. So that's part of this that we also give to the seller. The 2-page addendum, oh, and by the way, these all print out together. So you'll get all of these forms when you print out this coronavirus addendum up here. That's the form showing, that's the form CVA. No, when you print out the RLA-CAA, this CVA form is printed out automatically, and it's a 2-page addendum. This 2-page addendum is not a state or a TRG required form, but it's one that actually should be in your file, and we should use it. If you read through these, I should say when you read through these, the form discusses that, hey, seller, we're in a pandemic now, and we have to follow these rules. And it gives the sellers options to allow the agents to show the property. And most importantly, the seller can require that the buyer provide a pre-approval. There's a box there, if you can scroll up there a little bit. Danny, go up higher there. Yeah, I don't see it. Oh, that's a different form. Yeah.
Doing the listing agreement, right?
Yeah, we're doing the listing agreement addendum. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is the 2-page listing agreement addendum. Again, the first paragraph here explains that, hey, we're in this pandemic. But under 1B, there's a couple of things here that I think are kind of neat and you should probably use if you're a listing agent. If the seller checks this box under B2, it states that the buyer has to provide their pre-approval in order to get an appointment to show the property. Well, that makes sense to me, and in times like this, you don't want to, we can't do open houses. We don't want looky-loos coming through the property unless they can actually purchase it. And secondly, I would check the other box under B3 that these buyers will represent that they have viewed the property online. So in other words, they've gone through the photos, this is a property that they're interested in, and that they're pre-approved to be able to buy it. Then they can make that appointment with the seller to show the property. And if you've noticed, if you've been looking at any listings now, you'll see in the agent remarks where some of the agents, some of the listing agents are requiring this. They're saying, hey, you know, send me the pre-approval, send me the PEAD-V, and we'll schedule that appointment. And I think that's a good way to handle it. It's different if it's, you know, property's vacant. There's other exceptions out there. But for your typical residential home, this is a good way to handle it. The market activities down here, basically you can leave this blank unless the seller does not agree to permit you to do any of those items. Okay, so again, this is that first form, is that 2-page addendum. Have the seller sign this. I would check those 2 boxes under B2 and B3. And then you go to the next page, and that's the PEAD-S. So it's a separate form, and it's different from the PEAD-V. It's a different form, Danny. It's a 1-page form, and it basically states that the seller is not sick and that they will inform the agent if they do get sick. The seller understands that allowing showings may be dangerous and unsafe, and you voluntarily agree to it. You also list, this is the seller, the seller lists any minors that will be occupying the property. And lastly, that the seller assumes all risks. So this is a required form. You need to have all of your sellers, when you list a property, sign this PEAD-S for seller. It's a 1-page form. Again, it's different than the V, the visitor form. Okay, so we've got we reviewed the 2-page addendum. We reviewed the 1-page PEAD-S, and then there's the 2-page BPPP, the best practices, and that's the same as the buyer. And again, just as a review, that gives you all the rules for the listing agent and the buyer's agent. It states that the property needs to be clean, don't touch anything, wear a mask, wash your hands, etc. Going through there. In addition, when you're dealing with the seller, as stated in this best practices, it states that the listing agent is also responsible to post 2 signs on the property. They're supposed to post that it's a red and white sign that says, it's shown here, the posted rules. And the second page of this, I think you just go up here, the second page says, all persons entering this property agree to these rules. Wash your hands, wear a mask, practice social distancing. So again, this is the listing agent's responsibility to post these 2 forms somewhere near the entrance of the property. Also, the agent is responsible at the very least to provide hand sanitizer, okay, because that is part of that best practices. Just like we have here in our office, and when you go visit most businesses, the business owner is responsible to provide the opportunity to wash your hands upon entering any residence. So I would, at the very least, provide that hand sanitizer at the entrance of the home. You may also want to provide masks and disinfecting wipes. That's optional, or the seller may want that. And a lot of this depends on the client that you're working with and the attitudes of the seller or your clients in showing their property. Okay, so that's it. As a review with the seller, it's those 3 forms. It's the 2-page addendum that is an addendum to the listing agreement, the PEADS, and the best practices rules. Okay, lastly, there's that CBA form, which Danny had pulled up earlier. This coronavirus addendum, this was actually done back in April. I suggest you not use this form. What's interesting about this is that it says, hey, we're in a pandemic. There may be unforeseen circumstances that requires an extension of time to either remove contingencies, to close escrow, or to cancel. So if you have your client sign this up front, and again, this is the buyer and seller. So if you look at the top of this form is only used after you have an accepted contract. So you can make this part of the counteroffer, or you can do this as an amendment after you have an acceptance. But you're getting the parties to agree that, hey, you know, we've signed all these contracts and everything, but everything's up in the air because of this COVID-19, and we may or may not be able to close this. So this gives a backdoor to both the buyer and seller. And this is a form that they agree to up front. So if you have clients that are very concerned about what's going to happen because of this pandemic, this may satisfy them. But again, you have to have both the buyer and the seller agree to this. And so it basically means that, you know, we're moving forward on this signed contract as a handshake, and we're not going to enforce the timeframes on here, because all one party has to do is fill out that NUCC form, which is Notice of Unforeseen Coronavirus Circumstance. I don't know if I have that either. Okay. All right, so this gives you lots of outs because of the coronavirus. You can say, hey, I lost my job. You know, as a buyer, I can't close this. Or as a seller, I can't move up to my next leg. I can't sell my property. Or, you know, I'm required to stay at home. I'm in quarantine, whatever. So I can't fulfill my obligations in the contract. I'm sick, I'm hospitalized, etc. So it gives parties an out. Now, question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Regarding this one, the NUCC, this one you would use when you have already removed all the contingencies and this unforeseen thing happened, and you turn this in then, or when do you turn this notice?
Well, this notice is only useful if the clients have already signed that CBA. And that CBA is signed after you have a contract.
Oh. You recommend not to go with that form?
Yeah, and I'll explain why. You know, if you're in a transaction and one party gets sick, whether it's the buyer or the seller, to where they can't perform, right? Well, what are you going to do?
Right.
The reality is, we as agents, we're going to work this out, and we're either going to try to extend it, for months if we can. If we can't, everybody's going to cancel, because you're not going to get, in fact, the courts aren't even going to hear this. You're not going to get a court to enforce any specific performance case on this anyway. So there's no sense fighting over or even mediating over something that they can't do because of this COVID-19. So to me, it's more paperwork. You got to explain this obviously to your clients, and it's like, well, why am I signing this? You don't want to spend another half hour going over this form, when the reality is if a buyer can't perform because of COVID-19, or a seller can't sell because of COVID-19, it ain't going to happen. And it's going to be up to us to try to resolve it without having to go to mediation. And it's been my experience that people are going to be reasonable in this. And if you're the listing agent, you're going to put it back on the market, or you're going to try to extend it, something that satisfies everybody. Cool. So, forcing the people in advance to agree, I don't see the purpose of this form. Okay, but again, as a review, the buyers, you just basically need that PEAD, the V for the visitor, that's attached to the best practices. And for the seller, you need the listing addendum, that's a coronavirus addendum. And with that addendum comes the PEADS and the 2-page BPPP, the buyer practices form. All right, that's my 30-minute presentation, guys. Questions on
one more
that?
thing, Derf.
Yes, go ahead.
Regarding these 3 forms that you just mentioned.
For the seller?
Yeah. Are these 3 forms part of our checklist when we turn in our files?
No, we actually haven't revised the checklist, but that's a good question. It is required that the seller sign the PEADS, and it is required, if you're working with a buyer, that you have that buyer complete a PEAD/V for visitor for every property that they see. Now, I've been getting calls. Danny and I, we get a couple of calls every week from our agents. A lot of times they're representing the buyers. So even if the listing agent doesn't request that PEAD-V for visitor, you're responsible to have that buyer sign that form. And it's a real simple form. They list the property or properties. You can list, 3 of them if you're looking at 3 properties at the top, and then they sign at the bottom of the second page. And you just put that in your file because that means that the buyer signs and understands, and he's received that BPPP, that best practices form. That comes with that PEAD-V for visitor. So that's all you have to do, because in practice out there, you may see a vacant property, for example, and the agent may have a lockbox on it, and you just go and check it out yourself, and the listing agent may not require anything. So you're free to go out and show that. You're on your own. Make sure that nobody touches anything. Make sure that everybody has their mask, and that they wash their hands, and that you have that PEAD-V in your file so that you can show that that was completed for that specific property.
Yeah, I have that situation. I'm in escrow with a property where the agent did not ask me for the PV, and I did not get my clients to sign it. So now I should have them sign it even though we are already in escrow?
I don't see any purpose in doing it now. And it's even though it is a required form, most agents do not know when or how to use these forms.
Yes.
So I wouldn't go back and there's no purpose in going back and having that signed.
And it's not going to be part of our file anyway.
Well, yes, everything for the visitor, you're representing the buyer on this, right?
Right. So then if it's part of my file when I close escrow, then I do have to get them to sign them.
No, because there's no purpose in having them sign it after the fact.
Ah, I see. I see. Okay.
Other questions or chat? Do we have?
Yes, Derf, I do have
Yeah.
one. This is Amanda.
Hi.
Sorry. With regards to the inspectors and the people who are entering your listing to do their due diligence on behalf of the buyer, I give them the same visitor form. What if they don't sign it? How do we move forward? Because they say they have their own PPE. I got that question this morning, which is something I was dealing with actually while I was late to the meeting here.
C.A.R. recommended that you
So-
allow that at the property.
I'm sorry, say again. So you're representing a buyer.
No, I'm representing the seller, and we have to have a termite company come in. And the termite guy, I sent him this same PV for visiting, asking him
Correct.
to sign that prior to, entering the property.
Correct.
And he said that they had their own PPE, which is completely different from the form I'm asking him to sign. So
Oh, that's
Yes.
fine. Yeah, just get a copy of that. That's fine.
of his PPE.
Correct.
Okay, so he doesn't have to sign it. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Again.
Derf, it's Linda
this is-
Meyer.
Yeah, and Linda, if you can hold on a minute. Since Amanda, welcome. I was looking for you earlier. Amanda actually closed 3 transactions. This was in June, and she's been working with a lot of buyers going around. Tell us about your experience. And again, this was probably about 2 months ago, right? When this first happened, as far as the mask and washing your hands.
Absolutely. So what I did in order to, of course, make everyone comfortable, and the fact that we have to protect ourselves and give everyone these disclosures for the coronavirus, I actually purchased a box of different size gloves, masks, and booties, and the little alcohol wipes, and I put them in the Ziploc bags. And for my clients who don't have the required quote unquote PPE, I ask them to just bring $5, and I give them each one of those bags so that we can go and move forward with our showings, and again, still adhere to the guidelines that are being provided to us.
That's great. That's great. So you got them to actually pay for the masks and the supplies, right?
Yes, because it would
Excellent.
cost them more if they went out and bought each one of those things separately.
Excellent. And so what's been your experience with most listing agents? What percentage of the listing agents actually required you to submit that PEAD-V prior to showing?
Some of them, with the showings that I've been doing so far, it's been, I would say 90% of them, because they have it in their listing, but some of them, they'll have it in their listing and they won't even ask me for it, but I just make sure I get it for my own records.
Good, good. And as far as the, I lost my train of thought here. Even on, that was it, on the pre-approvals, are many of the listing agents requiring you to send that pre-approval prior to showings?
They're starting to do that. I've seen it in actual listings when under the showing instructions. There are a few that are asking for a pre-approval, and I asked why, of course, and they said just to limit the amount of contact for people who are not even approved to purchase the property.
Right. Okay. Well, good. I appreciate that input. And these are living documents. The PEADs, almost all of these forms change from April. They change once or twice from April to the end of July. So these are the latest forms. And in fact, when Amanda mentioned, gloves and booties, that was on the original, that PRE form, which is the sign that you post at the entrance. The original one basically stated that you had to have gloves and other stuff, but now it's just wearing the mask and washing your hands when you come into the property. So, these documents will change. I'm hoping they all go away here in a few weeks, so we don't have to deal with this. But it looks like they're going to be around here for a while. So I want you to understand these forms. Any questions on them, call me, text me, email me, or Danny, and we'll be glad to explain their use. I actually have all of them printed out on my desk. So if you're in the office, I can be glad to go over any of these specifically with you. Any other questions that we have? Any chats? Oh, I'm sorry, Linda. Yes, I'll get back to you. Sorry.
Well, I had shown a property about a week ago. I showed 3 properties, and they wanted the proof of funds and the PEADV also, but I furnished the booties and the gloves, and the people brought their own mask, but it was like it was almost a required thing, because I didn't see anything at the property, any one of those properties, that the listing agent had provided any kind of disinfectant or anything.
Right.
So I guess we're responsible for our buyers to protect them.
Well, actually, that's why C.A.R. has the buyers sign that PEADV, because they are taking that responsibility, and they are saying that they will wear masks and they will practice social distancing and they won't touch anything. So, it's another disclosure. Whether or not they read the paperwork or not, I don't know, but they are taking that responsibility, and that's why it's important that we have them sign that PEAD-V for visitor. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm in the office. I'm available. Give me a ring or Danny, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you have with these forms. Guys, I just read a report on statistics for this year. When they compare the number of sales this year to last year in 2019, in California, they're expecting by the end of the year to have as many transactions sold this year as last year. There's a handful of agents in TRG that are doing a bang up business because there's very little competition out there. Unfortunately, most of our agents are doing nothing. So, you got to make hay while the sun shines. The sun is shining. These interest rates are 3% or less. The market is going to get tougher when this goes away. There's going to be less inventory. There's going to be more pressure on these prices. So this is an incredible, unbelievable market that we're in. So take advantage of it, guys. Make it a great day. Bye-bye.